all for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Beautiful weather out there and still managed to come here. My name is David Corbin. I'm the Vice Chair of the Nebraska Sierra Club and also a Professor Emeritus here from UNO. And Sierra Club is one of the sponsors of tonight's event, as is Nebraskans for Peace. And I wanted to especially thank Tim Rinna and Richard Miller, who are here tonight, for helping to make some of these arrangements, as well, of course, as UNO and the Office of Sustainability and the Center for Urban Sustainability, specifically Sarah Burke and Steve Brody, who are also here tonight. Dr. Mann today, along with two other climate scientists, one who is here, retired Rear Admiral David Titley is up in the back, and presented for a short time before the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, and talking about climate change and how that it would be wise for anybody who's investing to be looking at climate change issues. So one of the primary reasons that they were here and they were able to do that, I know it was streamed live, so there were millions of people who were watching all over the world that particular event. I also serve on the board of the Public Health Association of Nebraska, which is an affiliate of the American Public Health Association, and I just wanted to let you know that in public health, climate change is a big issue. The American Public Health Association's next national conference is entitled Climate Changes Health. I'd like to take the opportunity also to draw your attention to the topic in its forefront right here in Nebraska, and that's the Keystone XL pipeline. If you would like to take signs with you today, yard signs, please grab one outside. Many of you, I see some of you who were in York, Nebraska on Wednesday testifying before the Public Service Commission in opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline. That is in the hands of 5 people who are on the Nebraska Public Service Commission. So I also have these, so if you want to write comments to the Public Service Commission, you can just tear one of these off and it gives you the direct email, the direct website or where you can submit your comments to the Public Service Commission about the Keystone XL pipeline. In addition, the Sierra Club has been working, many of you probably know that we have an election on Tuesday. We do have our endorsed candidates, which you can find on our website, which is sierraclub.org/Nebraska. But one of the issues is about separating yard waste. And as you may know, they haven't been separated, and we are, our own study found that that's one thing that we should do. So that effort is called Green the Stream. And if you'd like to know more about that, again, you could go to our website.
David? I have some handouts about what the email that said answer all 4 questions.
Oh yes, so from ODOC, so yes, there's that. And we also have petitions out there. So far we have over 1,600 people who have signed petitions against the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, the main reason that you're here tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Science and Director of Penn State Earth System Science Center. Dr. Mann is internationally renowned for his groundbreaking research in climate change, including the famed hockey stick curve. He's the author of more than 200 publications and 3 books. His most recent book, you see up here, and is on sale outside the room, was co-authored with Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist Tom Towles, and it's also the title of his talk tonight. I just finished reading Dr. Mann's book today, and it's both interesting and insightful. It was written before the election of President Trump, so it will be interesting to hear Dr. Mann's thoughts about what has transpired since the election. And as I said, there are books on sale, and he will be available to sign the books afterwards. So without further ado, warm welcome for Dr. Michael Mann.
All right. Well, thanks very much. I want to thank the Sierra Club, Nebraskans for Peace, the University of Nebraska in Omaha. I've been to Lincoln. Now I've been to Omaha. I'm not going to say one's better than the other, but it's great to have been to both now. So it is my pleasure to talk about the issue of climate change, the madhouse effect. It's the title of our recent book, and as David said, the book was published prior to the election. At the time we published the book, I can't tell you how many colleagues of mine came to me and said, climate change denial is so 90s, it's so yesterday. We're beyond all of that. Now we're on to the worthy debate over policy and solving this problem. Unfortunately, history had another idea in mind, and we did end up getting a president, Donald Trump, who is our very first climate change denying president. He is on record literally denying the science of climate change. And so I have updated the title of my talk, The Madhouse Effect, Climate Change Denial in the Age of Trump. We are now very much back in the madhouse of climate change denialism, with a president and a Congress led by congressional Republicans who are also in denial of the basic facts about climate change. So the basic facts. Let me start out sort of chapter 1. First of all, science. How does it work? Okay, because there is so much mythology, there's so many fallacies when it comes not just to the science of climate change, but today we live in this world of alternative facts where it's difficult to get some people to even accept sort of the basic workings of science and to trust the findings of science. Too often we allow contrarians in the climate change debate to frame themselves as modern-day Galileos railing at the scientific establishment. That's not skepticism, right? Skepticism is a good thing in science. It's an essential thing in science. But the indiscriminate rejection of overwhelmingly established scientific findings is not skepticism. That's a sort of one-sided skepticism, the contrarianism, or a denial. It's denial of basic science. And I'd like to quote when it comes to the issue of scientific skepticism, perhaps the most eloquent person to ever weigh in on the matter was Carl Sagan, who many of you may remember, one of the great communicators, science communicators of all time. And I think he put it very aptly when he said, the fact that some geniuses were laughed at does not imply that all who are laughed at are geniuses. They laughed at Galileo, they laughed at Fulton, they laughed at the Wright brothers, but they also laughed at Bozo the Clown. And for every Wright brothers, for every Galileo, there are 1,000, there are 1,000,000 Bozos the Clown out there on the internet typing away. And we are left with a public discourse that is polluted by misinformation and disinformation. The other pet peeve that I have is this idea that we have to treat matters of science the same way we treat political matters, as if we present both sides. The earth is flat, the earth is round. And we hope that the middle is somewhere in between, or at least that's the way the media often treats it. It's what we call false balance. The idea that you can put on the same footing sort of the marginal claims and views of a small number of representatives from fossil fuel interests, or representatives of front groups funded by fossil fuel interests, a few contrarians, and you somehow put that on the same footing as the overwhelming consensus of the world's scientists. Now, lest you think that this is just a problem, for example, in the world of the conservative media, let me point out that the New York Times, their most recent hire to their editorial board, is a climate change denier. Okay? Now, Bret Stephens would claim he doesn't deny climate change, but if you look at what he actually has to say, for example, his very first editorial, he made the argument that, look, the polls were off, during the last presidential election. And if the polling could be off, well, then these climate scientists could clearly be wrong about the science of climate change. So that's the New York Times. The New York Times is bought into this false balance, this fallacy that you have to present both sides when dealing with matters of fact. Bret Stephens is free to present his opinions about the implications of climate change and matters of policy, but in the famous words of Daniel P. Moynihan, he's not entitled to his own facts. And that's the way the New York Times is now actually dealing with this issue. So it's a step backward. What about the science? What about the science of climate change? We're about as certain about human-caused climate change as we are about anything in science. As I like to say, proof, people who demand proof, proof isn't for science, proof is for mathematical theorems and alcoholic beverages. It's not for science. In science, we deal with weights of evidence. We deal with degrees of confidence. And there's always uncertainty. But, you know, just as we're not completely certain about the theory of gravity, there are still physicists debating about the role of fundamental forces. We've never detected a graviton. So you could say there's still some uncertainties about gravity. That doesn't mean that it's safe to jump off a cliff, right? We know not to jump off a cliff. And here, when it comes to climate change, we're literally at, some people are asking us to jump off the cliff, given the overwhelming weight of scientific evidence that the problem is real, it's human-caused, and it represents a threat. To not act would be to jump off the cliff. Another pet peeve of mine, when it comes to the discourse over climate change, the sort of the public discourse, the sort of framing of extreme weather events, climate change and extreme weather. The critics will say, well, you can never prove that climate change caused that extreme weather event. And it's the same defense that a steroid-taking baseball player would use to say, well, you can never prove that the third home run that I hit of that season was caused by the steroids. Therefore, I'm absolved. It doesn't work that way. We know that statistically speaking, the overall increase that we're seeing in many types of extreme weather events can be related to climate change. We are seeing an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme droughts and heat waves and floods in a way that cannot be explained just by natural climate variability. We just published an article on this very matter about a month and a half ago, where we showed that climate change is influencing the jet stream in a way that made some of the extreme events that we've seen in recent years, the 2010 California wildfires, the 2011 Texas and Oklahoma drought and heat wave, and many other events, we have changed the pattern of the jet stream in a way that makes these events more common. It causes the jet stream to exhibit larger sort of undulations as it travels across the country, which gives you larger weather anomalies, and the jet stream tends to get locked in place. So the same locations day after day get rained on or get baked by the sun, and that's when you get record flooding, like we saw a little bit to the east over the last week or so, or record drought and record heat waves. So there is a connection. We know there's a connection. Why should we care? Well, it's not just about the penguins and the polar bears. As I sometimes point out, I always show a slide in my talks on climate change with a polar bear stranded on an ice floe, because it's the law. If you give a talk about climate change, you have to show a polar bear stranded on an ice floe. But by making the polar bear or the penguin the poster child of climate change, we have, in a sense, wrongly at times conveyed to the public that this is some exotic problem way off. You know, in the Arctic, maybe it's a problem for polar bears, but then why should I care? Well, climate change is impacting us on a daily basis now. It's playing out in real time in the 24-hour news cycle, on our television screens, in our newspapers. The impacts of climate change are no longer subtle. We are seeing the negative impacts of climate change, whether it's extreme weather, food, water, human health. national security, as my colleague Dave Titley speaks to very eloquently. The greatest threat to our national security is climate change, because it's a threat multiplier. These are some of the reasons that we should care. And in fact, the best reason walking up the steps right now, because what sort of world do we want to leave behind for our children and grandchildren, ultimately? The stages of denial. So there's sort of this canon, there's this logical progression when it comes to climate change denials. And it starts out with, well, it's not happening, it's not happening. There's a pause. Well, there's no pause in warming. We just had our third consecutive warmest year on record. 2016 was the warmest year on record, beating out 2015, which was the warmest year on record. Beating out 2014, the warmest year on record. 2017 has a fighting chance to be a fourth consecutive record global temperature. How about the record warmth we saw this February over a large part of the U.S., including, yes, here in Nebraska. It impacted much of the country. Well, the critics will then say, well, okay, you know what, maybe it's happening, but it's natural. I mean, stovetop temperatures change naturally all the time. Well, actually, with that 2015 heat wave, we're pretty sure it wasn't natural. It was actually an attribution study done by a number of scientists to look at the likelihood. You could take a climate model and you can run it under sort of pre-industrial CO2 levels and see how often it generates a certain type of event. And then you run it with elevated CO2 and you see how often it generates that sort of event. And that record February warmth happens 3 times more likely when you elevate CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. So we can't prove that it was caused by climate change, but we think we see the fingerprint of climate change in heat waves like that February heat wave and in the overall warming of the planet. It cannot be explained by natural climate variability. Another sort of take on this it's natural sort of argument advanced by folks like James Inhofe, the senator from Oklahoma, the senior senator of Oklahoma, that a snowball in the winter is somehow in Washington, D.C. is disproof against climate change. Actually, some of the record nor'easters that Washington, D.C. has seen in recent years, the fact that there was so much snow was a result of unusually warm Atlantic sea surface temperatures. And that means there's more moisture in the atmosphere, and you can get larger snowfalls. So if anything, some of those record snowfalls are actually indicative of what we expect to happen along the eastern seaboard with some of these winter storms. Well, James Inhofe, is one of the primary climate change deniers in the U.S. Senate. He was invited back in 2011 to give the keynote address at the annual climate change denial conference of the Heartland Institute. This is a think tank that was funded by tobacco interests back in the 1980s to debunk the science linking tobacco products to human health ailments, and today they're paid by fossil fuel interests to try to debunk, to confuse the public and policymakers about the reality and threat of climate change. And James Inhofe was invited to be their keynote speaker, but he had to back out at the last minute. He had gotten ill swimming in a lake back in Oklahoma that was suffering from an algal bloom as a result of the unprecedented heat and drought that Oklahoma was experiencing that summer. The next argument, okay, well maybe it's not natural, but it'll be self-correcting. It'll correct itself. And unless you mean that raising sea level several hundred feet will snuff out all of the coal-fired power plants, no, we can easily reestablish the atmospheric CO2 levels that existed at the time the dinosaurs roamed the poles, where there's no ice on the face of the Earth. Now, Earth can adapt to changes that take place, changes like that take place over 100 million years. The early Cretaceous is 100 million years ago. And all that carbon got buried through natural processes. And what we're doing today is literally unburying all of that carbon that got buried beneath the surface of the Earth, but 1 million times faster than nature. Not over a time scale of 100 million years, over a time scale of 100 years. And there's no evidence that we, let alone other living things, can adapt to changes on that time scale of that magnitude. Well, then the argument goes, all right, well, maybe it's not natural, maybe it's not self-correcting, but hey, it'll be good for us. Melting ice sheets lift all boats, after all. Well, unless, you think that, a world with an increasing global population competing for less food, less water, and less land, if that sounds good to you, well, that's the sort of future that we're talking about. And again, don't listen to me, don't listen to the Sierra Club, listen to what our national security leaders are saying, that this is the greatest national security threat that we face. And again, we're very privileged to have in this room one of the true leaders in that, on that topic here, Dave Titley. Okay, well, and finally, the argument is, we spent so much time debating this, it's too late. We can't do anything about it now. The good news is that it's not too late. There is still time to make the cuts in carbon emissions that we need to make to avert dangerous climate change. That was our message to Warren Buffett today, that there is still time to make the decisions necessary to ensure that we don't leave behind a fundamentally degraded planet for our children and grandchildren, but time is running out. There's a great urgency to this. So we've seen sort of climate change denial. There's this war on climate science that's been waged by fossil fuel industry front groups, think tanks funded by the fossil fuel industry, paid advocates, some of the same scientists who deny human-caused climate change today, who are paid by the fossil fuel industry to do that, were paid decades ago to try to debunk the science of tobacco and lung cancer. Literally the same scientists, I call them deniers for hire, all-purpose deniers. So there is this war on climate science. And as I've already alluded to, the hypocrisy when it comes to climate change denial can be pretty remarkable. The example of James Inhofe and his cancellation. The Heartland Institute, being one of those think tanks, had to cancel out because of the impact that climate change had on his own health. Another example that's sort of close to home for me, Ken Cuccinelli was the former Attorney General of Virginia, a Tea Party Republican. When he came in as Attorney General, one of his first acts was to try to subpoena all of my personal emails from the time I was at the University of Virginia, using civil investigative demand. This was a tool that was created for the Attorney General to actually deal with Medicare fraud. But Cuccinelli reasoned that since I had been working on the science of climate change when I was at the University of Virginia, and the science of climate change is clearly a fraud, this was a perfectly appropriate application of the civil investigative demand. Well, the courts didn't really agree with him. First of all, the Washington Post, I should say, weighed in on this matter no less than 5 times, denouncing Ken Cuccinelli's witch hunt against me at the University of Virginia. If I forgot to mention it, probably just a coincidence that Cuccinelli, much of his funding did come from fossil fuel interests. And their award-winning editorial cartoonist, Tom Tolles, who, as you know, I've now written a book with, weighed in at the time on the matter, not once, but twice. And I have to say, this is my favorite. It's Cuccinelli up in the judge's chair. Poor Galileo down, he wants his emails too. I don't mind being compared to Galileo, I guess. Well, the lower court quashed Cuccinelli's civil investigative demand on a technicality. In his 40-page filing to the court, he had forgotten to provide evidence of wrongdoing on my part. So I got thrown out by the court. He was challenged all the way to the state Supreme Court, which ruled on the case with prejudice, meaning they really don't want to ever see something like this come back to the court. So shooting down his witch hunt. Undeterred, Ken Cuccinelli went on to run for governor of Virginia in the next election. You might understand why I was motivated to actively campaign with his opponent. I had seen firsthand the sort of damage that Ken Cuccinelli could do to the state of Virginia. And I did campaign with his opponent, Terry McAuliffe, who was victorious. Ken Cuccinelli lost the election, and I'm not making this up, you can Google this later if you like. Ken Cuccinelli went off to work on an oyster farm on an island, Tangier Island, in the Chesapeake Bay that's slowly succumbing to the effects of global sea level rise. As I said, climate change, there is no greater hypocrisy than the denial of climate change. Well, talk solutions. Now, some of the critics would say, all right, so maybe we've got a problem, and here's how we solve it. And this is very popular among sort of many of our captains of industry, people from sort of technology, world of technology. We can engineer our way out of this problem. We'll continue to burn fossil fuels, but we will do other things. We'll shoot particles into the stratosphere, reflective sulfate particles that will block out some of the sun, and that could keep the Earth from warming up. Or we'll dump iron into the ocean to try to fertilize the algae and get them to take more of the CO2 out of the atmosphere. And every time you look in some detail into these so-called geoengineering approaches, the principle of unintended consequences really emerges. We could end up screwing things up even more by interfering with a system that we don't understand perfectly, by trying to offset one problem by another problem. And I'm often reminded of the song many of us grew up with. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. She swallowed the frog, swallowed the fly. What killed her in the end was the horse, of course. Right? It was the solution was far worse than the problem in that case. And so we titled our chapter on geoengineering, or what could possibly go wrong. Now, lest you think that this is just a joke, something we can dismiss entirely with humor, our current Secretary of State, a former CEO of ExxonMobil, one might understand why he likes a solution that allows us to continue to burn carbon and mine fossil fuels, but we'll engineer our way out of the problem. That's the view of our Secretary of State. It's the view of Bill Gates, who is on the board of advisors, is on the board of the directors, thank you, of Berkshire Hathaway, has advocated geoengineering solutions to the climate change problem. He has put much more funding into geoengineering research than he's put into actual climate change research or renewables, research into renewable energy. So Bill Gates is sort of on the right side of this problem. He understands climate change is real. He's said it's a real threat. Warren Buffett has acknowledged as much as well. But this is often, we'll find that this idea of geoengineering is often favored by people in the corporate world, as if we can just find some other way of solving the problem. As I said, if we were to pursue that sort of strategy, with some possible exceptions, one geoengineering solution involves literally sucking the CO2 back out of the atmosphere. Now, that would probably be relatively harmful. I mean, harmless, it would be relative. But you're trying to get the genie back into the bottle, and you're fighting the laws of thermodynamics as well as the laws of economics. It would be much cheaper to just stop putting the carbon into the atmosphere in the first place. So most likely that's the real solution here. That's the path forward. It isn't to wish for a climate policy. It's to actually do something. And, the fact is that even in this era of Trump, where it's easy to become dispirited about prospects for progress in dealing with climate change, we've had some amazing progress. We've seen some amazing progress over the past 1 or 2 years. The Paris Summit, which doesn't solve the problem, but it puts us on a path towards keeping CO2 levels below dangerous levels. It turns out that if all of the countries make good on their commitments, and now the U.S.'s commitment is suddenly called into question, but if all the other countries make good on their commitment, it would be enough to nearly cut our carbon emissions halfway from what they would otherwise be, which would give us a 7 to 9 degree Fahrenheit warming planet by the end of the century, halfway to the sort of 3.5 degree Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius level that we often think of as where we get into the most dangerous climate change impacts. So it gets us halfway where we need to be. It puts in place a process where we can now see our way to a solution. The encyclical by Pope Francis in my view, was a very important development. It helped reframe this issue where I think it needs to be. It isn't just a matter of science, economics, politics, or policy. It's a matter of ethics, of intergenerational ethics. The decisions we are making today determine what sort of planet we're going to leave behind, as I said before, for our children and grandchildren. Whether you see that through sort of the lens of our biblical responsibility to be protectors of creation, to be stewards of the earth, or you see that through the lens of a parent who wants us to leave behind a planet that isn't degraded for our children and grandchildren. It's really the same issue. It's about our ethical obligation to make decisions now that don't essentially mortgage the planet for future generations. So we have this challenge now. Donald Trump, by the way, just a short story here, when the galleys for the book came back, so the book was published in September, the galleys came back in August, it was already becoming clear that Donald Trump, maybe that was going to be an important development, and we realized we didn't have a Trump cartoon in the book. So this was actually done at the very last minute. Tom drafted up this cartoon, and and it nicely featured the wall. But the wall in this case is being a wall that Donald Trump has created, isolating himself from the reality of climate change, and of course we will all pay for it. And he has pursued, this headline says, sort of a scorched earth approach to climate change. He's appointed to cabinet level positions individuals who deny the science of climate change or who have very close ties to fossil fuel interests, like former ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson or Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator, who has close ties to the Koch brothers, and as Attorney General basically ghost wrote policy statements for fossil fuel interests and presenting them as official government policy. So we do find ourselves with this challenge. Now we have, rather than a president who embraces our role in global leadership on this issue, which Barack Obama did, through our diplomacy with China, through our role in the Paris negotiations, through the passage of the Clean Power Plan. We have a president who is threatening an administration and representatives of all of the major government administration officials who are trying to undo the progress that's been made. Some of us have been out there trying to take climate change denying politicians to task. A few weeks ago, I was marching in Washington, D.C. I spoke at the D.C. Science Rally, marched with my good friend Bill Nye. We have to be out there literally in the streets. And this was a story that journalists felt like they had to cover. It isn't every day that you see scientists marching in the streets. And when scientists are marching in the streets, rather than spending their time where they prefer to be spending their time, in the lab, out in the field, teaching students, writing papers, when scientists are spending their time doing that, you know that we have a crisis. And it speaks to the fact that we need to hear not just the voices of scientists, all of our voices need to be heard. Those of us who care about the future of this planet need to be doing all those things that we know we can do to raise awareness among our friends, our family, our colleagues, to encourage people to vote in the midterm elections. We need to make sure we hold our policymakers accountable for our interests rather than the short-term interests of the fossil fuel corporations, which too often fund their campaigns. So if anything, personal involvement is even more important now than it was before. We can still solve this problem. The rest of the world is moving ahead. The states, municipalities are moving ahead. We've seen carbon emissions now plateau. We're starting to sort of bend that curve downward because of the massive growth around the world in renewable energy. We're starting to move in the right direction, but we need to make sure that here in the U.S. we continue to take the leadership role that we've always taken. So let me leave by simply emphasizing that the planet really, literally does lie in the balance. So our efforts couldn't be more important now. Thank you.